Welcome to The Art of Discernment, a podcast where professors from across the Masters University discuss current events and higher education from a biblical worldview.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Art of Discernment. I'm Dr. Bob Dixon, and today I'm joined with Professor David Crater, Chair of TMU's Engineering and Computer Science Department. David, it's nice to have you here.
Great to be here.
Now, David holds 3 degrees from Georgia Tech University, 2 in electrical engineering and 1 in computer science. He's also working on a master's degree in software engineering from Harvard Extension School with a thesis in artificial intelligence. And before coming to TMU, his wide-ranging professional career has included work on electronic warfare systems for the Navy and on satellites for the Air Force. So that's a mouthful, David. You come eminently qualified to talk about this particular subject, and I'm so fascinated to get into it. Answering a question that, if you're paying attention, you're starting to hear it. It's becoming part of the conversation globally, and that is related specifically to artificial intelligence. And the question is, does artificial intelligence have human rights, or do artificial intelligences have human rights, and what does that even mean? So we're gonna talk about that today. But again, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here, and it's been a lot of fun.
So let's just jump right in. What is artificial intelligence in the real world? Not sci-fi, but what is it really?
Well, the way I would put it, Bob, is human beings are now building intelligent systems that are high fidelity enough that they can deceive you or me into thinking that we're speaking with a real human being. For example, Google has demonstrated an intelligent system that can make a phone call, make a reservation at a restaurant for you on your behalf, with the party on the other end thinking the whole time that they're talking to a real person. It's that high fidelity. It has voice inflection. It has gender, male or female sounding, sounds to its voice. It says things like and and let me think, and it just sounds that high fidelity. So when we talk about AI, that's just the tip of the iceberg, but that's one example of what we're talking about.
So when I call a customer service line, say for the warranty on my car or whatever,
right?
What are the odds that I'm talking to the first line of defense for this company is actually a human being?
Right. Well, often you can tell if you're talking to a machine because the voice sounds very machine-like. It doesn't sound, human. But that's changing. Voices are becoming, synthesized voices are becoming increasingly high fidelity. The different frequency components of a voice can be very accurately emulated and recreated by a machine. So often you'll know you're talking to a machine, but often you will not. You won't know you're not.
And artificial intelligence, I remember, the Gary Kasparov Deep Blue, chess.
Oh, you followed that?
Yes. Yeah. And that was
25 years ago. Yeah, believe it or not.
And there was a lot of debate when Deep Blue defeated Kasparov. There was a human element behind it.
That's right.
Now, if it's AI, there's always a human element behind it. Somebody created this thing. But that was 25 years ago. And artificial intelligence, intelligent enough to beat the world champion chess player. How far advanced are we from that at this point?
Well, in 2011, IBM's Watson not only defeated the top 2 Jeopardy game show contestants, but more than tripled their scores. And nobody claims there was a human behind the curtain there. I mean, machines are doing this. In 2016, there's a more advanced game than chess that's called Go. It's an ancient game. It has Chinese origins, goes back to 500-600 BC. Way more complicated than chess. A machine beat the world grandmaster in that game in 2016. And since that was 5 years ago, since then, the top performing AI game players have become completely unbeatable. So from a standpoint of games, AI is already far superior to human intelligence. That's undisputed.
So that raises a lot of questions. We're talking about games here, but these games are strategy games. These games are intuitive, and even in some ways, if I can use that term, that I would have to think that at this point, artificial intelligence is being applied to investment strategy. Artificial intelligence is being applied to
no question.
National defense strategy and war games and things like that.
Right. AI has multiple subfields. The most prominent one that we hear most about probably these days is machine learning. It's how does a machine look at data, how does it learn, and then how does it act based on what it learns from that data. Computer vision is also a sort of a subfield of AI. And natural language processing is the third sort of major subfield of AI, how machines understand human language as opposed to a computer language, talking spoken language, real time. And then how do they produce that kind of language as well? In fields like investments, machine learning is typically used very commonly to take big financial data, way too big for a human or even a team of humans to really process, and put an AI on it and detect and draw out the different trends that are in that data, and then make investment decisions accordingly. That's kind of old fashioned nowadays, and that's been done for years.
And aren't those programs buying and selling just ahead of the human element there?
Well, yeah. I mean, rapid trading, high frequency trading, sometimes referred to, is an old thing that predates even artificial intelligence. But AI algorithms and techniques are increasingly being applied in that realm, often in very impressive ways.
So, boy, I mean, it's accelerating so fast, and this is always true in the field of technology. But it's starting to get to a point now where you're hearing phrases like human rights applied to artificial intelligence entities. I don't know what else to use.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about that. Like, what's the secular perspective on that? We'll go there first.
This is all serious discussion that's happening in world universities. It's mainly in world universities, trickling out into media and certain popular stories about this and that. It's not a serious discussion in Congress, for example, yet, but it's heading in that direction. So all that to say, the question is now arising, particularly as AI entities begin to have bodies. In other words, these AI entities begin to become robots, often very humanoid type robots, 2 arms, 2 legs. They can hear, they can speak, they can even interact intelligently with a human. The question becomes, what rights should these AI entities have? And a lot of people, particularly from a secular perspective, who view human beings as nothing more than highly evolved machines, right?
Right.
There's no such thing as a soul. There's no spiritual, eternal component of a human being. We're just evolved animals, the most evolved animals. There's not a whole lot of difference between a highly evolved animal and a machine, right? A machine is intelligent. A machine can make decisions. Some people even claim machines nowadays have free will because they can make choices. They have an array of actions they can take. They choose one that it thinks is best, based on the circumstances in which it finds itself.
Is there a way?
This gets deep.
It is. I mean, my mind is. I teach a science fiction writing class on this campus, and we're circling around to what Asimov and the gang wrote about in the 40s and 50s. And
that's right.
Science fiction authors are not very good at predicting the future historically. They're not very good at it.
Right.
But in robot ethics, they were wrestling with these issues, long before what was just imagination. And here we are.
You want to talk about the history at all?
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, please. How did we get from that IBM computer that filled 6 rooms to considering human rights applying to machines?
Right. Well, the history is very important in this, as I know you know, because computer scientists have sensed since the early 20th century. I'm talking the 1930s, 1940s. People like Alan Turing and John von Neumann, which are big names in computer science and computer engineering, knew and made explicit in their writings that these things we're building, these computers, will eventually be sophisticated enough that you can use them to emulate a human being. They knew this. I mean, this was clear in the 30s and 40s. Asimov is writing, as you said, the first physical robots were built in the 1960s that began to integrate multiple human-like faculties to the point where they became, humanoid-type things. And then in the 1970s, you have the Star Wars movies where R2-D2 and C-3PO are extremely intelligent robots, right? Nothing like that existed and nothing like that exists yet. But what was that? That was George Lucas looking around at what was happening at the time and saying, this is where this is going. It's pretty clear that this is where this is going. So we are on the tail end of, getting close to a century now of people thinking and developing and working towards this goal. And so really, from the standpoint of, human rights, it was kind of inevitable that we would get to this point where we're starting to ask, what is a human being, and what separates a human being from a robot, right? All these secular books that talk about AI ethics get to that question. What really is a human being?
That's a good question to entertain because it gets us, to the more important things of life.
Yeah.
And we're going to get there shortly in this podcast. I want to just briefly define, we talk about human rights for an AI. We're talking about things like property rights. We're talking about things like, can an AI have feelings? Can an AI be self-possessed, or can it be owned? Is this, does owning a machine that thinks for you, is that slavery?
Is that a form of slavery?
Yeah,
right, exactly.
These are. Does it have freedom? It may have. Can it be turned off? Is that murder? Like these are interesting.
Yeah.
Secularly, from a secular perspective, there's a lot of conversation that can be had around these topics.
Yes.
Do you see this showing up in the court of law soon? I mean, I think eventually this will become a legal battle somewhere.
Yes. Interesting. You mentioned the legal standpoint or the legal realm. There's a case in Estonia, the country of Estonia, currently where a government entity is attempting to produce an AI system that will handle court cases below a certain dollar threshold. In other words, the machine will judge the case. No kidding, no joke.
Wow.
So, and they're serious about this. If it's the attitude there is, if the dollar amount is low enough, meaning the risk is low enough, the rules of these kind of cases can be mechanistically applied in such a way that an intelligent machine can do it. Now, of course, that raises all sorts of ethical, judicial questions of justice and so forth, even if it's a small amount. Can a machine administer justice to a human? That's highly questionable.
Well, if you've ever been on the phone with the DMV, you feel like that, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
They haven't deployed that system yet, but as far as I've been able to tell, it is still under it's still being actively pursued, and they intend to eventually implement it. So all that to say, yes, it is being applied in the legal realm at increasing levels of authority.
And you mentioned earlier about if a self-driving car crashes and okay, let's say property is damaged, or worse, there's injury somewhere. Who's liable for that? Now, right now, say if it's Tesla, for example, I don't know, I'm just picking that name. Then I suppose it would be that company. But at some point, though, if we're going to go down this road, do you point to what's the serial number of this AI right here? Because this AI is the one responsible.
Yeah, maybe it has a bank account that we can levy.
Well, that's the other thing. Can an AI own property? I mean, forget about whether it is property. Can it get to a point where it owns property and operates as an independent entity in society? And I guess the answer to that would be, secularly speaking, yes.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people argue that there is a secular contingent out there that says, no, this is crazy. Machines aren't human. They don't have free will. They don't have parents. They can't reproduce. They're not human. They make arguments like that.
Right.
However, those purely secular arguments break down in a hurry when robots start building other robots. And in a sense, begin to reproduce, right? They're never going to reproduce sexually, of course, but they are going to reproduce. And you can even say that they have parents because somebody created them. So this stuff gets muddled in a hurry if you don't have, a reference frame for what is a human being, what is Christian anthropology.
So let's turn a corner here. There's a secular argument for and a secular argument against AI as having human rights and all that stuff. What about the biblical perspective on this? I know this comes up in your classes, I'm sure. How do you answer that question from a scriptural perspective?
Right. Well, of course, we're very interested in doing that. In our computer science program here at TMU, we have an artificial intelligence emphasis. And what we're teaching our students is, number one, to be aware of this, these developments that are happening in the world. But number two, to view this from a biblical perspective. Namely, that a human being is a specially created entity that is created by God, not by humans, not by nature, not by chance and accident. Machines, by contrast, are made by men. And the only entities that have human rights are entities made by God. Human rights come from God. Only a creation of God can have a soul. because only God creates souls. We are totally powerless to create souls. We can't impart souls. And as you're probably aware, in the history of Christian theology, there's been a whole discussion, there's a whole tradition around when a human being acquires its own soul. Does God individually impart a soul at conception to each individual human? Or does the soul naturally arise somehow as the process of conception takes place, through some, the ingenious things that happen chemically, electrically, materially at conception? Does the soul somehow arise naturally through divine power there? This gets deep in a hurry.
Yes.
But obviously, we're not doing any of this with our machines. And as a result, machines are not human and can never be human and will never have human rights. They just won't. And the Bible does talk about machines. It talks about technology. It even talks about very advanced technology, Book of Revelation type stuff that's really mystical, veiled type stuff, and we're not always sure what it's referring to. But it never implies that any of these things become human. The only way you can become a human is through two human parents, even if it's, through some sort of advanced asexual petri dish type thing, right?
Right.
It's still two humans with two human parents, male and female, produce a human being. That's the only way you can produce a human being. It has all sorts of implications, political, legal, right to life.
Yes.
All this sort of stuff is a deep, deep well. But it also touches AI, right? And what is a human being? What is a life, right? What and who is going to live forever, and what and who isn't?
You raised some really interesting points, and it gets right to the heart of the question, and that is why does it matter to make this distinction?
Right. Yeah, the human, non-human distinction is fundamental to so many areas of life, and it's a fundamental biblical distinction too. Dr. MacArthur talks about this all the time, the huge gap that exists between human beings and even everything else that God created, animal, plant life, that whole thing. There's a huge gap between mankind and everything else in creation. And what is that difference? Well, the difference is the human soul has a divine stamp on it, which is expressed in Genesis as in the language of, in the image of God, he created him, male and female, so on and so forth. When we make machines, we are imaging God's creational activity, but there's a limit to that, and we're not creating souls. We lack the power to create souls. We lack the power to give these machines eternal immortality, which the Bible says every human being possesses from conception, the point of conception. So the questions of salvation, questions of, can Jesus Christ save a machine? Of course he can't. It becomes absurd in a hurry.
I feel like we've had this conversation before about animals.
Right.
Is it okay to eat a cow, right? Or
right.
Is my dog in heaven? Like these, we've already answered these questions, right? About these sentient things that are animals that live and are born.
That's correct.
But they don't have souls.
That's right.
It seems an easier question to answer when we're talking about machines, but we live in a world where people don't accept even that answer about animals. So we know we're going to have this debate.
That's right. It's very much the same sort of train of thought, a train of argumentation, the history of theology, how the church and theologians have dealt with whether animals have souls, whether animals live forever. It kind of all that sort of line of argumentation and writing and history applies even more so to machines, right?
Right.
Because animals at least are creations of God in the same way, humans are, but to a different category, to a different degree. And machines are not even creations of God. They're creations purely of men. So that is, in my mind, an important fundamental distinction, and it matches up with the biblical presentation of things pretty well.
And you mentioned earlier that the conversation really about human rights, et cetera, really begins to find some traction when you take these AI and put them in a physical form. You give them,
That's right.
human physical characteristics, eyes, voice, a physical corporate body. But that doesn't change anything.
No,
that's counterfeit.
It is counterfeit. And if you give them the image of free will or the image of emotions, it's a counterfeit in the sense that we've only imaged the real thing. It's not counterfeit in the sense that you can't if everyone knows that it's counterfeit, it can be used for a legitimate purpose and, without deception or evil.
Correct.
In fact, it can be used for great good. But it can also be used for evil and deception and for seduction of people into thinking that machines are more than they really are, human beings are less than they really are. So that has got to be a central part of our message.
I guess we should make clear, neither one of us are against artificial intelligence. We, as you mentioned, we have an AI emphasis here.
Yes.
Artificial intelligence is a tool.
It's a tool. It's a technology. It's like any other technology that can be used for good or evil.
So I guess how I want to kind of wrap this up is ask you to talk a bit about what would be some of the uses of AI, that you guys discuss in the classroom. Like, how should we as believers think about AI as a tool for us or as a tool for good? Obviously, everything can be good or bad, but what are some of the good uses of AI?
Well, you can imagine all sorts of very positive, valuable, life-improving ways in which these robots and other intelligent machines can be used. You mentioned investing.
Yeah.
Using an intelligent system to crunch on big data and come up with a more intelligent investing algorithm, of course, is a fully legitimate thing, and improve the efficiency of markets and create wealth and these sorts of things, all of which are good. You could have robots in homes helping, for example, elderly people with certain things that they need help with that they may not be able to afford to pay a person to do, even if they have family or other human support networks, which we hope they do have. It's just more convenient, and it's helpful, and everybody's happy to have a machine do it. This Amazon Alexa system that people have increasingly in their homes, which is not mobile, but it is intelligent, and you can get all sorts of intelligent answers and feedback from the machine. It almost has like a personality of its own, right?
Yeah, right.
That is something that becomes very beneficial in a multitude of ways. The educational, the ways you can deliver education and improve education and teach students about creation by teaching them how to create an intelligent machine is extremely powerful. This is sort of a theme that really motivates me, and it goes back to the story of Genesis and what the book of Genesis means when it says, the Lord took dust of the earth and breathed into it the breath of life. What is a computer chip? A computer chip is silicon, copper, germanium, a little bit of noble metals like gold and silver, all of which come out of the earth. It's all dust and dirt.
Yeah.
And all we've done is form it into an intelligent system. And now with our new, increasingly human-like software algorithms, breathing into it the breath of life. Or if that sounds too dramatic, breathing into it the image of life. So it looks like it has life, even though we know it doesn't have a soul. So this is, we talk about creation all the time in the context of AI.
It's such a great illustration of campus life here at Masters, because what we're talking about here, what you guys are talking about in your classes about artificial intelligence is a other side of the same coin that our students are discussing in their Bible classes.
Right.
This conviction about creation, about what makes something truly human, and also being able to think about God as creator and what were his materials and how the intelligent design of all that.
That's right.
It's fascinating. And that's what it should be. And that's what it is here on campus. And everything is brought back to what Scripture has to say and how we can think deeply about these issues as believers, and then take these ideas into the marketplace of ideas. And look, these are important debates and discussions that are going to take place.
Yes.
And we as holders of the truth need to be in that conversation.
Right.
And in fact, that conversation is a wonderful opportunity to share what we know to be true about the world and the gospel.
Yes.
So I so much appreciate what you're doing over there in the computer science. And I have to say, I would love to hang out and in the back and just listen. Most of it will go over my head when you get into the real deep tech part of it, but the philosophical stuff, I love it. It's so fascinating to me.
I think there's a big market for this. In the Christian community, we need to really start talking about this at a deeper, more consistent theological level, because it's becoming bigger and bigger. And the people mainly driving it are secular voices, secular entities, the big tech companies that don't understand, don't grasp, don't believe, don't accept, don't respect the Genesis account.
Right.
But as you just said, here on this campus, we do respect the Genesis account. We recognize it as an obviously credible account of how something as amazing as a human being came to be. And we thoroughly enjoy this, and we rejoice in it. And we hope, some of our listeners will come to our campus or send us their kids to participate in this great conversation that we're having.
Absolutely. Professor Crater, thank you so much for spending some time with me here today. This is, like I said, been a lot of fun for me. I was looking forward to this conversation, and I know we're going to have many more like this because we're just getting started really in this, and it's getting more and more interesting each year, I think.
It's a pleasure. Let's do it again sometime.
You got it.
Thank you for listening to The Art of Discernment. For more information on the Masters University, visit masters.edu. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We'll see you next time.